This time around, it's the turn of Microsoft SharePoint Online. We're going to take a look at what's new, what's cool, and more importantly, what can it do for you. So, are you ready? Hi there everyone, Andy Malone, Microsoft MVP as well as a Microsoft certified trainer. Welcome back to the channel. I really appreciate you stopping by. This time around I thought we'd take a look at SharePoint Online. There's been a lot of changes recently and I'm going to take a look at what I think are some of the cool features and also some of the new features that will really make a difference to you. Now if you're subscribed, fantastic, I really appreciate it. I was looking at my statistics the other day. I'm getting loads of new visitors, really appreciate it, but I need you to click on that subscribe button and ring that bell, especially if you want to learn the good stuff in the future. And as always, I love your feedback and your comments, so get them down below. So without further ado, let's take a look at SharePoint Online. By the way, I've time coded all of the chapters, so feel free to jump in and jump out at the various topics. And I'm going to come back at the end and we're going to wrap things up. So for the first part, let's take a look at some of the interface changes that were recently introduced, as well as the use of hub sites. And if you've never used these, they are rather cool. Let's take a look. So I'm kicking off here in Microsoft SharePoint Admin Center, in which of course comes part of Microsoft 365. Now, first up, you'll notice here that the number of cards have increased. So in here, you can now do a unified site search. So across all of your active sites. And of course, these are the sites that you have access to. Now, of course, you'll notice here that Teams and also Microsoft 365 Groups by default will generate a SharePoint team site. And here in the Admin Center, the Active Sites page is particularly useful because here you can see not only the site, you can see whether it's a Microsoft team or not, how much storage is used, who's the primary admin, the template that it's used, and when it was last accessed. That could be really useful. Who created it, and again you can see the number of page visits, and you've got a little bit of statistical data there. So that's really, really useful. Now just moving down here, I've got a number of sites here in Oslo. So I've got Oslo HQ, Oslo Production, Sales, Technical Team, Year 1, Students, and so on. And what you can do, you'll notice that one of the options here is if I go ahead and select this, there's an option that says Hub. Now, what a hub site does is it's really, really useful. So what I've done is I've created a hub site. So if I click into the site settings here, and you'll see click on Hub, and this particular site is a hub. And what that means, it's almost like a primary site. And what that does is once I've created a hub site, I can then go down to these other sites here, and I can then go and say, hey, okay, I want to do a bulk edit here. What do you want to do? Well, I want to associate these with a particular hub site. So if I associate this with the Oslo HQ and then click on Save, what happens here is they'll get the same interface settings. So if I go into Oslo HQ and go into the sites here, so any color schemes, any settings that I've set up, any shared menus, and also you'll get a unified search here. So you can see search across sites, and this includes all of those subsites. And the cool thing about hub sites is you can detach them and reattach them and flip them around and so on. Really, really useful. And that's hub sites. That's essentially how they work. Now, another recent feature here in the Admin Center is that you'll notice that we have deeper integration into Microsoft Teams. So here I have an active site of Oslo HQ, and when, of course, you create a group, a Microsoft 365 group, or a Microsoft team, it will also create a team site. And these are absolutely connected to each other. All right. Now, the one thing to note, by the way, and you can also see this in the 365 Admin Center, is that Microsoft have recently integrated teams and groups together. So it's all really down to the amount of collaboration. And you can see this if you go ahead and create a new group. So if you create, basically you've got the different types of interactivity and what you can do with those groups. So a security group, for example, has absolutely no collaboration at all. You can have a mail-enabled security group. So basically this is just a security group that has got a mailbox. That's it. Distribution list, of course, that's it. Just a distribution list or a contact list. Whereas a Microsoft 365 group, you get all of that collaboration. You get a SharePoint team site, you get a shared calendar, mailbox, you get a shared document library in SharePoint Online, and you get Planner and things like that. And the other thing that you also get is when you've created the group, it says, do you want to convert it into a Microsoft team? So there was a lot of confusion. Do remember that if it becomes a Microsoft team, you can't then become back to be a Microsoft 365 group. They are interconnected. And so if you delete a team, you also delete the group as well. So they're connected from there. So when it comes to information governance, the SharePoint Admin Center has recently been updated. Certainly the engine has anyway. And there are some pretty cool compliance features. Let's take a look at some. So going back to the SharePoint Admin Center, the next thing that I want to talk about is the information governance. Now, in the past, if you wanted to place a user or a document library on hold, or you wanted to have some kind of retention policy on that, it really was quite a complex setting. You would have to go into the site settings and so on. Now it's much easier. And in fact, you don't even do this from SharePoint anymore. Now what we do is we simply go into the Compliance Center. This is, of course, assuming that you've got the rights to do this. Yeah, okay, so here in the Compliance Center, I'm going to scroll down here and we have a couple of new important settings here. And this first one is information governance. And information governance is really where you can come in and create your, not only your data loss prevention labels, but also retention labels here as well. So let me just show you this. I can go in here. I can say, hey, I want to go ahead and create a new retention label. And I'm going to say this is my tax label, let's say. And I'm going to say this is my 1 year tax label. And you can put in a little description there if you want to. You can specify how long you want to retain this data for. So in this case, I've said, hey, let's create this a 1 year. So what do you want to happen at the end of the year? Do you want to just delete the content automatically, trigger a disposition review? So that means that you can say, hey, let's have a meeting about it. Let's review it. Do we still need to keep a copy of it, and so on? And you'll be asked to add in a user's email address there, or you do nothing, just leave it as it is. The other option is you could place the item on hold, and that's essentially retaining the item forever. So the item is detained, it won't be deleted. So even if the users delete it, it'll essentially go into the user's recycle bin. So traditionally, this is how you put an item on hold. But again, very, very useful. Very, very useful for not just for security, but also compliance capabilities as well. The other option is you can only delete the items when they reach a certain age. So you can say, hey, after 7 years, just delete it. Or you can say, let's say when the item was last modified. So if you had an item, let's say for 1 year, so let me change that for a year. I could then say, okay, a year after it was created, just go ahead and delete it, or a year after it was last modified. So if you created the item in December, modified it in March, it would be a year in March before it was deleted. Now, just a quick note, by the way, whenever you delete anything in 365, there's 2 recycle bins. So the first stage recycle bin is for 30 days, and then it goes into a second stage recycle bin for 63 days for a total of 93 days. All right, just to let you know. And then there's an option that says don't retain or delete. So you might use this, for example, for personal items. Yes, so anything that really doesn't need that. So I'm going to go ahead and just accept the default settings here. And I'm going to go ahead and create a label. Now, one of the things that you do when you've created a label, the next thing is you say, okay, do you want to publish the label? So you can publish the label. You can auto apply the label if it detects a specific type of content, or do nothing. So I could say, hey, I want to do that. I want to publish that later. Now, if you publish the label now, it will ask you, do you want to create a new label policy? All right. Now, the problem with that is you're going to have like 20 or 30 different policies just with one label. So my advice here is to do nothing. Click on done. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come to my label policies. And you can see here, I've got a policy that says Oslo labeling policy. So I could go ahead and click onto that. And it just tells me a little bit about that policy. But you'll notice I can't actually edit that here. For that, I need to click on the edit button here. And in here, it shows me the different labels that I've got in here. Now, I could, of course, add an additional label if I want to. And sure enough, here's my tax label that I just created. So I can add that to an existing policy, click on next, and then publish that. Okay. And to be honest, that's a good tip, because if you don't do that, when you create labels, it keeps asking you, do you want to create a new policy? And you essentially end up with a whole bunch of single label policies. Now, one of my least favorite features of Microsoft or Office 365, as it was about a few years ago anyway, was OneDrive for Business. OneDrive originally was great. It was fantastic for home users, but OneDrive for Business was always a bit clunky and it never really worked very well. Well, Microsoft made the wise choice to kind of update that to SharePoint. And I'm really pleased to see now that the OneDrive Admin Center has had a recent makeover. In fact, it's all fully integrated now into SharePoint. Let me show you what I mean. So from the SharePoint Admin Center, simply come down here and then click on Show All. Now in Show All, you'll see that you have this little settings wheel here. And what do we see? Look at this. We now have a whole bunch of OneDrive settings. And this is interesting because if you click on the OneDrive Admin Center, boom, you get an error message like this. Okay, so it's showing you that pretty much everything has now moved. So in here anyway, we can manage all aspects of OneDrive. So first up, notifications. Do you want to allow notifications? Yes or no? It's on by default. Retention. So again, we have that magic retention number here. So by default, days to retain a deleted user's OneDrive. Now, again, you can change that to, well, as you can see, over 3,500 days there, which is good. Now, in other words, you're putting then a retention policy on that, which I showed you not that long ago. So you can change that if you want to. Again, by the way, this depends on the user's plan. Storage limit. I love this, by the way. It's amazing how many people don't know this, but did you know that you've obviously got a terabyte of storage here? So every user has that. Again, depending on your license, you may also get 5120 terabytes. So you can enter a value of up to 5 terabytes. Andy, tell me something that's undocumented. This is actually not entirely true. So if you've actually got a premium version of Microsoft 365, that means an E3 or above, potentially you could increase that up to 25 terabytes. So typically it goes to 5 to 10, then up to 25. There is a very good document on this at docs.microsoft.com. So literally I can just sweep across here, and as you can see, I've now increased that to 5096. Awesome. By the way, not available for small business users. So that really is just a business enterprise feature. Finally, we have OneDrive Sync. And of course, this means if users have got the Sync client installed on their desktop devices or on your mobile devices, you basically saying, do you want to see the Sync button in the OneDrive website? Allow syncing only to computers joined to specific domains. So for enterprise customers, this is really important and stops files going astray. You can also block specific types of files as well. So things like MP3s, movies, very large files. Although to be fair, we have a very large file storage now in 365, which is really good. So what about SharePoint policies? Well, in this section, we're going to talk about two types. We'll talk about access for, let's say, unmanaged devices. So devices, guest use, and so on that are connecting. What exactly do you want them to see? And also, we need to talk about sharing as well in 365 and also in SharePoint, because it's really, really important that you understand exactly how this works. Let's take a look. So on the left-hand side here, I can see policies. Now, please note that in the policies, we've got two options, sharing and access control. Now, please note that these are your tenant settings, and it's really important that you understand anything that you change here will affect every SharePoint site, every group, Microsoft 365 group, and every Microsoft team as well. So in terms of sharing and who can access what. So in the first tab here, you can see that we've got our default external sharing settings on. And in essence, you've got 4 options here. So anyone, new and existing guests, and only people within your organization. So you've got 2 options, SharePoint and OneDrive. These can be managed independently. So first up then, let's talk about this option. So in other words, this means only people in your organization can view content. So any shared documents, anything at all, means that nobody is allowed to send anything outside of your organization. Now, to be honest, that's pretty much unworkable, all right? So it's much more likely that you're going to want to have these. Now, to be fair, the problem with the other end of the scale, or anyone, it means that users can share files and folders, including links that don't require a sign-in. In other words, anonymous users, anyone, guests. And the worst thing about that is anonymous users means anonymous. So if you share, let's say, to the public, there is nothing stopping them sharing going on further. And in essence, it's a potential spiral downwards. So I don't necessarily agree with anyone. Now, if you come into new and existing guests, so guests must sign in. So you can, in Microsoft 365, and I've shown this many, many times before, how you can come here into Azure Active Directory and really, it depends on your own company policy. So one of the things that you can do in here, when you create users in Azure AD, you can create a new guest user. Now, the general rule of thumb is that you can have 5 guests for every paid license that you have, right? So 5 collaborative and interactive guests for every paid license. So if you had 3,000 licenses, that's oodles of guests. Now, in this case, the administrator can just go in, I can invite a user, and I can then grant the user access to various resources, such as apps, documents, and so on. So in here, I can go into members and guests, and I could then go and say, I want to add a member. Now this, you could invite an external guest. So I could say James Bond dot, or at, I should say, mi6.gov. Okay, so I could go ahead and add in James Bond as a guest, and that will go off and send him as an email. Now, the reason why you can do that is because your company has allowed you to do that. It's in the admin settings. But that's one way. It's because I'm the owner of this team or this Microsoft 365 group that it allows me to add guests. Now, that is really useful, but remember, sharing things here, it affects everyone, including teams. So new and existing guests, that means any guests that have been created either by the administrator, or it also allows you to add in a guest now. It allows you to create a guest like I just did. Compare that to existing guests. This is where, as a team owner, I would not be able to do that. The guest must already be in Azure Active Directory. In other words, it's already been created by the administrator. All right. Now, you might, depending on the type of company that you are, you might have a process where you fill in a form and say, hey, I've got a customer who needs access, and you fill in the form, and the administrator then goes off and adds that user in, and that's absolutely fine. So it's really important that you understand external sharing in here. And likewise with the various folder links, who can see what? Do you want to see the owners' names? Do you want site owners to be able to display the names of people who viewed items? Again, privacy might be important to you, so you may not want those things. The second of these is access control. And again, as it's tenant-based, this is where you can manage access control to SharePoint, to your sites in SharePoint. So for example, unmanaged devices. So that means that if you're not using internally managed devices, for example, in Intune, this is like Joe Public. Are you going to allow full access to resources on the web, or only limited read-only access or web-only access, which means that they couldn't download a document in OneDrive, they would need to view it online? Or do you want to go ahead and block that? Please note that the default setting here is important. The other thing that you've got, you can also do something called sign out inactive users automatically. Now, you'll have noticed that occasionally when you log into Microsoft 365, it doesn't prompt you for your username and password. That's because it remembers your login from a cookie, okay, which is a token, an access token. Now, you may not want that. Let's say if you're in a bank, you might want to force users to log out, okay, just for security reasons. And that's what this area is here. Network location. Again, you might say, you've got offices in London, New York, and Oslo. So you might only want your users to be able to access SharePoint, OneDrive content only from specific IP address ranges. So for example, the specific offices where the users work. So when the user goes home in the evening or is perhaps in a hotel, they won't have access. Okay, very useful. And finally, apps that don't use modern authentication. Now, if you've got older pieces of Microsoft software, let's say Office 2007, really old products, these are essentially products that don't support multi-factor authentication. So in that case, if you're just relying on users' usernames and passwords, this is potentially a major security breach. So again, you would typically want to block access with those. So there you have it, those 4 settings. Sharing, as I said, sharing controls default, and you've got those access control settings, which are all part of your tenant policies. Now, in my opinion, some of those features are some of the most important. You've got to get those, certainly the security features, right. So anyway, there you go. Just what I think are some of the new and some of the cool features that are currently in SharePoint Online. I really hope you appreciated that and that you got a lot out of it. And if you did, of course, please go ahead, click on that subscribe button, ring the bell, and you won't miss any future goodies. And as always, if you've got questions, feedback, anything at all, please go ahead and pop them down below. And please do like and share the video. So there we go. That's it for this week. Until next time, you stay safe and I'll see you soon. Take care. Thanks for dropping by. Hope you enjoyed the video. Go ahead and click on the subscribe button and ring that bell, and you won't miss a thing. See you next time.